It was always raining in the land of Gud. It never stopped. At least that's how it seemed to Splidge. He figured it must have stopped occasionally, otherwise the city would surely have been washed away by floods long ago. He was standing under the covered protection of the market hall, raised upon its wooden pillars, watching the water cascading off the slate rooftops opposite and shoot out from the gargoyle spouts. In great jets it splashed down onto the cobbled streets below, creating a hazard for any unsuspecting pedestrian passing by. His eyes were distracted when he saw a girl dressed in figure-hugging black leather, a few years older than himself, with raven-coloured hair rushing towards him. If all the girls in Gud looked like her, Splidge thought, he was going to like it here. Even in the morning light, the boy could see that she was very beautiful and took pride in her appearance. She ducked under the archway next to him into one of the very few dry spots in the city. "Morning," said Splidge with a nervous smile. "Hello," replied the girl automatically, taking little notice of the boy. A girl like that would have had plenty of unwelcome attention, he realised. She flicked her hair to dispel the rain, and as she did so, Splidge caught a whiff of her perfume. It was beautiful. He wanted to say something else to her, but he was struck dumb with inexperience. The next instant, she had gone, and the encounter was over. Splidge watched her run up a side street and vanish into the rain. The smell of the girl's perfume had lingered in the air, all too briefly though, and now it too had vanished. His introduction to the city had been intriguing, and he wished that he had had time to wait and see if she might come back again. But he hadn't. He needed to find the notice board. It was still early, and he might be lucky. The boy had left home in the dark. Travel wasn't easy, especially on foot. He had trudged along the rutted, mire-filled tracks from his village, and as first light was upon him, he picked his way through the quagmires surrounding the south gate, avoiding the splash from the travelling hawkers' ponies and the pack-horse trains that were heading out to sell their wares in the locality. He'd already fallen over a couple of times and was covered in mud and reeked of stagnant bilge. Some days it rained more than others. That morning it bucketed down, and the boy was soaked to the skin. He cursed himself for not bringing his umbrella. It was stupid, really. No one went anywhere without their umbrella. Having one didn't make you any less wet, of course. The rain often defied the laws of gravity and swept horizontally under the protective canopy, showering you in the face. Rain was something you got used to. It was all part of life. With it came all the other associated nuisances: mud, grime, filth, and physical discomfort. These naturally affected your health. Pneumonia was the great taker of life in Gud, especially for the poor. Not everyone could afford the price of coal to keep the fires going. If your hovel didn't have shutters in the windows, the damp would get you. That was probably one of the major causes of death in the city. And on occasion it was possible to stumble across bodies wrapped in blankets and left abandoned on the street. A wagon would come soon enough and take it away. Someone would bury the dead. Prayers would be said. Hymns might even be sung. But it was doubtful if anyone would remember for very long their recently departed. People were too busy trying to survive in this tough old world. In the dim light, many of the classier properties in the city could be made out. A few workshops, offices and tradesmen were taking down their shutters, sweeping the effluent into the wide gutters and setting out their stall. Some of these had the owners' names sign-written above their establishments. Splidge read a few of them as he searched for the big hoarding. Wren and Hook, architects. Newton, weights and measures. And a grumpy-looking pudding of a man was wedging open his door. T. Cromwell, demolition. Then, in the centre of the market square, he saw it, the city notice board. Splidge crossed over, shooing away the unattended hogs that were rooting in a dunghill that was stacked against it. A few carcasses of chickens lay strewn adjacent, and a bunch of apple cores sat fermenting to one side. City pride was certainly missing. Splidge scanned the billboard rapidly. On it were pinned many sheets of printed vellum. Some had municipal rules and regulations. Others mentioned lost pets or stolen animals. A few were job advertisements. Many were advertising services offered. One of these made Splidge laugh out loud. It simply stated, head-removing service. No explanation, just to contact Mr. Ketch, next to the Crown Hotel. The next one appeared less unsavoury. For adjustments to drapes, curtains and all other hangings, contact A. Perrypoint at the scaffold. There was one in particular that he wanted to read. He had heard about it a couple of days ago, but it didn't mean much to him then. Now it did. Now it was relevant. He found it easy enough. The wax at the bottom gave it away, and he squinted at it. In fact, so hard was his concentration that finally the dripping rain running in rivulets down his face went completely unnoticed, and he forgot he was cold. After a moment he tore off the ink-smeared paper from the rusty nail which held it. There were large bold letters printed in black and gold. At the bottom was the royal seal, complete with red ribbon attached. This, Splidge knew, was an official document from the palace. But the words were smudged, and only a few were legible. The boy studied it again. There was something about the young man's determined manner as he stood in the cobbled square deciphering the page of text in his hand, defying the rain, which made him appear more grown-up than he was. In fact, he'd celebrated his 12th birthday only the day before. He had come of age. At 12, he was officially a man. His mother had woken him early and sent him off to the city. She instructed him to take a glance at the proclamations board. All important news was posted there, including these advertisements for work, and he would now need a job. In Gud, when you reached the manly age of 10 years plus 2, you were required to work. From that point forward, childhood was over. The toys were packed away and your first pair of proper grown-up boots were worn. Your father, if he hadn't been sent away as Splidge's had, would present you with a work jacket and cap, most likely a hand-me-down. He would proudly pat you on the head and take you into town in search of a trade. There were more opportunities if you were young in Gud. Those that had reached their midlife at 20 years tended to be idle. By 30, you were on your way out. The Gud god would be waiting to snatch you away to do his bidding if your sins didn't get you first. If you were lucky, at 12 you might be taken on as an apprentice to a blacksmith, or become an assistant porter, a trainee mason, or a carpenter. If all else failed, you could always set up in business as an umbrella maker. Splidge wasn't a solitary figure in the market. The city was a busy place, day and night. Oxen were being driven through by a herdsman. A wagon had arrived to deliver barrels of ale to the inns and taverns, and the proprietor of the Crown Hotel was busy giving instructions to the Gudian Fly, a stagecoach with 6 fine horses chomping at the bit and eager to be on their way. The carriage was fully boarded with an assortment of wealthy travellers and sales representatives. They looked pleased to be leaving the dirt-ridden city. Dressed in all their finery, these rich folk were a striking contrast to the dripping lad by the notice board in his shabby second-hand sopping wet clothes, eager for work. His mother had only been able to provide him with his granddad's ancient work jacket. It was old-fashioned, moth-eaten and ill-fitting, but even so it made Splidge feel grown up and important wearing it. Unfortunately, due to its great age and, more significantly, the loss of its protective wax coating, it acted like a huge sponge and was soon laden with the heavy rainwater. "Hello, Splidge," a voice called. Splidge looked up and spotted a scruffy boy of a similar age to himself clinging precariously to the top of a lamp-post on the other side of the square. He crossed over to him and regarded him with mild amusement. "What are you doing up there, Snotty?" "I'm snuffing it." And he thrust a small conical instrument over the flame in the light's housing and put it out. Then he slid down and joined Splidge. "I've got a new job. I'm a lighter and snuffer now," he proclaimed proudly. "The lamps of Gud City are my responsibility now." "Blimey," said Splidge, impressed. "That's a good job." "Yeah, although it's wearing stinking great big holes in me trousers, all that shimmying up and down these poles." Snotty slapped the lamp-post proudly. "It's better than being a sluicer." "A what?" "Not a lot of people know this, but under our feet are miles of subterranean tunnels." "Blimey, what are they for?" "Them be drains, supposed to wash all the crap out to the river." Splidge nodded. It sounded plausible. "So what about it?" "Well, they get blocked, don't they?" "Do they?" Snotty laughed. Yeah, all the bleeding time. So, you need a sluicer. Splidge looked at him, trying to imagine what that must have been like. A boy sent down to the sewers with all the filth, slime and shite that was funneled through the vents in the pavement. He spotted Chops, the butcher, across from where they were chatting. He was tipping a bucket of cow offal into the kennel, a channel in the middle of the lane in front of his shop. The stinking intestines slipped down the road until it disappeared into a drainage hole where it would drop into these tunnels and mix with all the other putrid sludge. Snotty saw the look on Splidge's face. Yeah, not nice, he said. You have a paddle, which is a sort of brush, and it scoops up the slops and you shove it along. You have to unblock the blockages, sometimes with your own bare hands. Imagine it up to your waist in turds and floating carcasses. I don't want to imagine it. That was my first job when I came to the city. Splidge had known the short, cheery boy in front of him from back in their village. They'd gone to school together and played in the orchard, scrumping apples and building tree houses. Childhood was short and sweet, and you had to take your kicks when you could. One time they had discovered a dirty great hole in the lane in front of the schoolhouse. They'd covered it with an old sack and taunted Lancaster, the strict headmaster, into stepping onto it. They had a bone to pick with him, as he'd previously locked them in a cage and suspended them over the class for being naughty. When he stepped onto the sack, he instantly sunk to his neck in the muddy water. He was angry afterwards and tied the boys in a sack and then had them dunked in the village pond until they nearly drowned. Happy days. What about you, Splidge? You still looking? Just started. It was my birthday yesterday, but I have found something promising. He broke off as two girls came running across the wet cobbles towards them, splashing through the puddles without a care in the world. Look out, warned Snotty with a big smile. It's the Terror Twins. Splidge laughed. I thought they were triplets. Oh, didn't you hear? Perky died. She got the pox. Oh, bum, said Splidge. The girls came thundering to a halt and grinned at the two lads. They were dressed in grubby cotton pinafores over a coarse blouse. They must be earning, thought Splidge, as they both wore decent quality leather boots. What you doing? Said the tallest. Snotty wiped some wet soot from his face. Working. And you, Freckles? We've got jobs with Mrs. Chops at the butcher's, exclaimed the smaller of the girls. It's true enough, replied the other. Well, I never thought I'd see the day when you, Lucy Longtrousers, gets a job, Splidge laughed. I thought you were going to marry a rich man and live in a posh house. Get real. That was just a schoolgirl dream. No rich man's going to marry me, unless you make a fortune quick, Splidge, she laughed. Course I have a job. I'd starve without one, wouldn't I? Have you got something yet? Splidge was about to tell them about the advertisement he'd found on the board, but was interrupted by the short girl, Freckles. Here, have you heard? Porky's up the brewery. Nah, he never is, said Snotty, who was shocked. Yeah, only working for you-know-who. Who? Asked Splidge. The Baron. It was Lucy Longtrousers who answered. Mean bugger. Who? Asked Splidge again. The Baron. That's who. Anyway, Porky, he's a licker. Snotty scoffed. He's what? That sounds dodgy. Freckles poked the sooty-faced lad in the ribs. Stupid. He's a label licker. She could see both boys were not comprehending, and she rolled her eyes at their ignorance. You daft buggers, she grinned. Porky's sticking the beer bottle labels on at the brewery. He licks 'em and sticks 'em. Bugger, that gum'll kill him, said Snotty seriously. Bloody hell, yeah. Didn't think of that, Freckles shrugged. What's the matter with the gum? Asked Splidge, feeling the odd one out. It's the stuff they stick the labels to the bottles with. He has to lick it, right? Well, it's made of some new chemical the Baron's been inventing. It's poisonous. Is it? Remember Lame Larry? No, I don't think so. Yeah, you do. The lad with the limp and the withered arm. Oh, yes, how could I forget him? Older boy, wasn't he? Yeah, well, he worked for the Baron, like Porky, licked them labels, and turned green. Dead within a month. Bloody hell. They gossiped for a few minutes more, and then the girls said they'd better get off to work as Mrs. Chops was a bit of a slave driver, and away they went, skipping through the puddles on their way. Well, I can't hang about neither, Splidge, said Snotty. There's another 100 of these lamps to put out. Blimey, exclaimed Splidge, impressed. Thing is, when I gets them all out, it's blinking time to light them all up again. Still, no rest for the wicked, eh? And the sooty-faced boy dashed off to another lamp-post and shimmied up to do his duty. Splidge watched him for a moment, envious that he and the girls all had jobs, and then he remembered the slip of paper. The royal advertisement, for that is what it turned out to be, was turning to mush in Splidge's hands. Although he couldn't read all the words, he knew that this was a job that he should like to apply for. Employment was rare at the palace. Payment was rumoured to be generous. Food and lodgings were generally supplied. Even the king was supposed to be affable. But best of all, your work title was prefixed with the prestigious label Royal. Splidge looked again at the slowly disintegrating paper in his hand. It read, "His Royal Gud is seeking a smudge to come and work for him at the palace. The new employee will be well rewarded and expected to," big smear, "in the national," washed away text, "experience was," black mush. Well, the rest was unreadable. The ink had mixed with the rainwater and left a grey smear where words once were. It didn't matter, the gist was clear, and the boy grinned. To work for the palace was what everyone aspired to. Splidge didn't care what the actual job was. He'd be happy sweeping the chimneys, cleaning out the pigs, or even stoking the furnace with hefty lumps of coal all day. He just knew that his mother would be extremely proud of him if he could get hired. With her disability and being a single parent and having another child to bring up, it would be very helpful to have a breadwinner in the family. They'd all been poor for a long time and things had been difficult, so if the boy could get any kind of work, that would be good. Splidge was determined to do his best, and moments later he was running home with what was left of the soggy paper held tightly aloft in his hand. What Splidge had no way of knowing was that his every move had been watched. A pair of grey eyes sunk deep in a piggy face had stared out from behind two large rubbish bins. These were overflowing with hay, straw, husks, vegetable leaves, legume shells and brassica stalks on the far side of the market square. The watcher had been lurking in this location for most of the morning. To anyone passing, the fat, dishevelled individual propped up against the wall and protected by the driving rain by the canopy of Defoe's coffee emporium would have looked like a man who had spent the night pushing many mouthfuls of fatty food into his face. On closer inspection, such an observer would have concluded that this bulky, lazy slob of a fellow had guzzled a lot more alcoholic beverages than was truly good for him. And this was exactly what he wanted them to think. If any perceptive individual had taken any further notice of him, they would have realised that the overweight, balding, chubby-faced wreck of a man had been coming to the square every day now for a week. He'd not always taken up residence in the same position, of course. He'd varied his observation points and was particular so as not to draw any overt attention to himself. Yet his focus was always the same. Without exception, he concentrated his manic stare on the market notice board. Whomever showed the slightest interest in the royal advertisement, his employer immediately wanted to know about it. That day, after eyeballing the 12-year-old boy, the man with the hog-like features had some significant news to tell his boss.